Hello and welcome back to the Med Device Cyber Podcast. I'm joined here by your co-host Christian Espinoza, and today we're going to be talking about total product lifecycle security and developing a secure software development lifecycle. How are you doing today, Christian?
I'm doing good. This is one of my favorite topics. It's something that is the TPLC or the SPDF is something that's commonly neglected and is often why software ends up unsecure or insecure, in my opinion. But
Yeah,
I'm doing pretty good. I did put on some, not enough. It wasn't SPDF. It's what do you call that? The sunscreen. I put some of that on the other day. I'm at the
SPF.
beach. Like, what?
SPF.
SPF. Yeah.
There you go.
So I still got a little bit sunburn. But yeah, I'm stuck in Florida for a couple days. Worst place to be stuck, I guess. But travel delays going through Dallas. I figured I'd rather be stuck here than Dallas. So
Yeah,
that's what's going on with me.
seems like there's a delay anytime you fly through Dallas. I think they're just not used to weather at all there. So if the wind shifts the wrong direction, they shut down the airport.
Yeah. So maybe I'll avoid Dallas next time. But
Yeah,
it's all
there you
good.
go.
So let's go back to TPLC and SPDF. SPDF. What are those like the same or are they really different? What do you think?
So TPLC and SPDF, I think that the Secure Product Development Framework is part of the total product lifecycle. So when we're looking at total product lifecycle, total is kind of the key word there. It goes from the concept phase all the way to decommissioning, whenever you're done supporting the product. So it needs to cover everything. The Secure Product Development Framework, product development is an ongoing effort. It's not a one and done situation. It keeps going throughout the life of the product. So it's a framework that ensures you are managing security at every step of the way. You aren't missing any big considerations. You're designing it with security at the front of mind. You're performing regular code checks going through the design process, and you aren't leaving security to just a time block at the end. That I think the synonymous part is the SSDLC, the Secure Software Development Lifecycle, which goes into that cyclical process. So you're making a change to it, you're reviewing the change, you're implementing the change, you're testing the change, and then you go in again, you're making another change. All of that needs to have security at the front of mind. There are a lot of processes, a lot of tools, lots that goes into a secure software development lifecycle.
So the SPDF, the Secure Product Development Framework, is really synonymous with an SSDLC, a Secure Software Development Lifecycle. Would you say that?
Just about, yeah. They're pretty similar. And then all of that ties into the total product lifecycle. So it's a component of, the full product. Obviously, the development is the main part of the product. You have an initial device, you keep making tweaks and changes, you keep developing it, you keep changing it. And so that's what we're looking at with the total product lifecycle. And that's what we're looking at with the secure product development framework.
Yeah, and I think the total product lifecycle is something that needs more emphasis, and I think that's why it's a requirement now. I know in the past I've worked with a medical device manufacturer that had the assumption, which is a true assumption, that the device would be in a secure room in a hospital. But what they did not consider is when the device is decommissioned and the hospital no longer wants it, what were they going to do with the device? And these devices did not have encrypted hard drives. So the hospitals were getting rid of these devices. People were able to purchase them off of eBay and other sources and grab all the PHI off the hard drive. So they totally kind of forgot about that whole decommissioning and the security involved with that. And this even applied like back in the day when I worked for the government, the DoD, they would get rid of like printers. And some of the printers were classified printers, and they would just sell them to whoever wanted to buy them. And a lot of these printers had hard drives on them with classified documents. So I think it's extremely important to think about from, like you said, concept to decommissioning, the security in that entire process, because it's often forgot about once the product is sold. And that's even like there's post-market management, which is once it's sold, but there's also the decommission aspect. And both of those need to be considered for the TPLC.
Yeah. Yeah, it all goes in all the way down the line, and a lot of times, yeah, manufacturers aren't thinking about that. They say, "Well, when the device is done, it's done." But if you throw that in a dumpster and it has patient records on it, I know now everyone's pushing to like cloud EHR systems, but before, when EHR was coming into play, everything was on-prem. And then when you have these on-prem EHR systems, people just leave them on the computer and throw them out, and someone could go dumpster diving and then pull out thousands of patient records. And it seems like a bit of a silly way to hack the organization, but oftentimes the easiest way is the path of least resistance. Going into the dumpster is a lot easier than trying to hack from the outside into a hospital network. So everything needs to be considered start to finish here. I think a really important part of it that is also often overlooked is, what is the development environment like? So not just how you're building the product, not just the code going into it, but who's interacting with that code. How are you securing the code? How are you securing your workspaces? Are you just renting a WeWork office and leaving your laptop there when you go for lunch with an unlocked door? Anyone can make any changes that they want to it. Are you enabling multi-factor authentication on your GitHub? A lot of this stuff manufacturers aren't really thinking about, and that can be a very, very easy way for their device to be tampered with or compromised.
Yeah, I think something that's also not considered very often, and we've had a couple clients have some challenges with this area, is the update environment as well. Because when we're talking about the TPLC, we're talking about, and the SPDF as well, is if we need to patch our system because there's a vulnerability that came out, how do we securely develop that patch, which is one part of it? That's more the SPDF portion. But then how do we securely deploy that patch, which is the other part? And I think a lot of people just don't bother to consider that aspect of an attack. So, because one of our clients, and I think you're familiar with this client, one of the challenges where they're able to do over-the-air updates to their products, but the environment they were doing the over-the-air updates from was basically their corporate environment. So they're like, engineers are writing the patches, right? We're connected to the same corporate network as HR and the accountants and other people that could easily click on a phishing email and contaminate the engineer's laptop, which could then therefore contaminate all the products via the over-the-air update. So, I mean, all these things need to be considered, and it's really a lot to consider, actually.
Yeah, we had kind of a similar situation where the client had a device, and the device itself was extremely secure. We were helping test it, helping secure it, and we were just kind of drawing blanks trying to hack into it. There was not really an easy way to hack into this product. And what it was doing, it was taking in some information, and then it was receiving updates. It was performing analysis on a local machine, receiving updates from the cloud anytime there was a change. And you can capture that update process. It's encrypted, of course, because it's going over the open internet under HTTPS. You even look at the cipher suites. That's a common problem. So what type of encryption are you using on that transfer? Everything was secure. And then we looked at the sort of the password for that transfer, and it was pulled straight out of Stack Overflow with a publicly disclosed vulnerability in the key itself for the encryption for the data transfer. So the encryption was secure, but the key was something that could be easily guessed and had been easily guessed
It
before.
doesn't matter how great the encryption is if the key is
Exactly.
very simple and you can break it, right?
And so we were able to just guess the key, and then we could push out our own updates across all of the fielded devices with whatever we wanted on it by tampering what's going on in that update server.
So that's one of the
So
vulnerabilities with I think, like, there's always like the convenience factor of OTA, over the air updates, people like to say, but there's also a major pathway for attackers. Like the scenario you just gave, if I can hack in the infrastructure, now I can push a malicious update to everybody very easily.
exactly. And you're not going to have that consideration if you have service techs take a USB thumb drive and upload it directly into the device, but then you have to deploy service technicians to all fielded locations. So trade-offs on both sides. Are you more worried about convenience or likely easier security. But even having service techs go out, what if, they go to the bathroom, someone swaps the USB drives, things like that. There are always considerations there. So there's never going to be perfect security.
Yeah, like I'm at a hotel and I had to go print something. Um, I was supposed to like wet sign it, like with a pen. So I have a USB key, and there's a kiosk computer. But I was like, I'm just gonna like sign it electronically and see if they notice it's electronic versus a wet signature, because I didn't want to go and put this USB key in the kiosk computer. And if I'm like, let's say I was the update engineer, I've got the update on here, but then I go use a kiosk in a hotel, that computer, which those are notoriously infected. Then now my update's going to be affected. So you have to have a whole process around that as well to make it secure.
Yep. Yeah, and so that goes into the total product life cycle. You have to have all of these processes covered. You have to touch up on every single area of security. You can't leave any base uncovered. And so, it goes outside of just the device in ways that a lot of manufacturers might not be thinking of. You know, who is doing these updates? Are you outsourcing it to contractors to do these updates? How can you trust these contractors? Who is doing your development? Is it done in-house? Do you know if, you're outsourcing to a contract manufacturer? How are they developing this code? Are they doing it right? So there are so many questions that can go into this, and it's always going to depend on the device, the environment, how you're developing it, where you're developing it, but all of that needs to have an answer.
It's almost like a tabletop exercise. You sit down and think of all the scenarios and the data flow for everything about your product and how you update it, how you decommission it. You have to like think through like every use case basically to make sure this is I guess totally covered, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's something where we actually do that exercise. It's something that the FDA wants to see for medical devices, not specifically for this, but that's threat modeling. And so when we're doing threat modeling, of course, we're saying, what if someone uses a bad password on their device? What if there's bad encryption in the device? What if all these things go wrong? And we're also saying, what if developers don't have multi-factor authentication on their GitHub accounts? What if their GitHub account password is password? What if they are leaving laptops open and working in a coffee shop and then they don't lock their laptop when they leave? All of that goes into consideration. How are there controls that are going to prevent things from happening in the development environment, in the manufacturing environment, in the research environment? And so threat modeling covers that whole total product lifecycle outside of just looking at the device. And, I'm sure we've talked about threat modeling a lot and we've talked about all the common pitfalls, but that's a really big one with threat modeling, is keeping the lens too narrow, focusing on the device instead of widening it and looking at the product and the systems involved.
Yeah, and that's a good point. My cousin used to work for a uh, major staffing firm. He was a software developer. He had all the information on a laptop. He left a laptop in his vehicle while he ran into a convenience store in the Houston area, and someone stole his laptop. So it was a major disclosure. There was like 80,000 client records on his laptop unencrypted. So it's no different than a service tech going to update one of these devices. That laptop may have sensitive data. That USB key may have a patch on it, but how do we know that patch wasn't modified? Which goes back into that integrity and the hashing and maybe a digital signature to make sure the patch wasn't somehow modified. And then I
Exactly.
think the other aspect that's often overlooked, like when I did work in the DoD and even commercial work, a lot of like you mentioned, a lot of people move things to the cloud. A lot of softwares and medical devices deployed in the cloud. But the question I think people often neglect is where, I mean, the cloud is the cloud, but physically in the cloud, like what country is my data in? Because in the DoD, we had people and commercially too, they would be using a cloud, but they would chose a site that's like in a country where what do you do if that country no longer likes the United States, or there's a riot in the country, or someone breaks in the data center there, and now your U.S. government data only is in another country, as example. So I mean, there's a lot of things to consider.
Yeah, and even just considering where in the US is your data, like a little bit of a fringe example, but how are you, if you're storing all of your information in a singular cloud location based in we'll say Oklahoma or something, or Florida, the US is prone to a lot of natural disasters. We get hurricanes, tornadoes, fires, floods. And so, are you protecting your data? Are you protecting your product in the event of an event, something like that, a natural disaster happening? And it seems like a fringe case, but it happens all the time. There were all of the fires in LA, and of course, there are a lot of data centers in LA. There are hurricanes in Florida, hurricanes even reaching up into Atlanta. I know that we even use data centers in Atlanta, Georgia, and so there are problems that can happen out there. I'm
Mhm.
sure about half the world's data at this point is in San Francisco, and someday the ocean's gonna, big enough earthquake's gonna happen, and San Francisco is gonna get swallowed up by the ocean. And so, what's happening to all the data then?
Well, that goes to the planning portion and that TPLC. I think if you need to have the data always be available, then you need to find 2 data centers that are the data's mirrored on, and the data centers are geographically pretty far apart.
Yep.
I think that the in the DoD, I think it had to be like 150 miles apart. I think in general, like a natural disaster is contained to like 150-mile radius was the rationale.
That sounds about
I would
right.
probably put them more than 150 miles apart, though.
Yeah, I figure you'd want to be in two pretty distant places. Like if you have a data center in the southeast, then you'd want one in the northwest, or stick it in the middle of the desert of Nevada or something where nothing really happens.
Right. Yeah. And so that's part of the total product life cycle. What are some other common things that people neglect to think about from a TPLC perspective? We talked about the development environment. We talked about updating. We talked a little bit about decommissioning. We talked about maybe where you choose to host your data or your software. What other considerations are there from a TPLC perspective?
So I think thinking about how users are interacting with the product and where they're interacting with the product. This will tie in a little bit to the update side of things, but what if users aren't always connected to the internet? What if they're in an environment where they can't receive updates? What if their infrastructure is not going to support your device in the way that it may be supported in other places? A problem that we recently were dealing with for one client was they had a solution. Their device had a problem going back and forth with certificate problems. And what the FDA wanted to see is that certificates were essentially baked into the device, and a certificate authority in the hospital network could upload that certificate in. It would be part of the certificate authority. There's a trusted route going back to that CA. And what the problem was with the manufacturer is not all of our clients, not all the hospitals that we're operating in have a mature enough IT department where they have this full infrastructure set up. So now what? We can't we can't change the device for only a few certain environments. We have to find out a good solution that's going to work for everyone. And so we ended up finding a good solution, which is essentially if a hospital doesn't have a CA that they can use, the manufacturer was going to provide basically a script to develop that CA themselves and then pull the certificate onto the device. So they acted partially as the IT department, but then there's a whole additional layer of involvement. And so,
When they have a script, you've got to make sure it's secure as well,
exactly, yeah,
without a hard coded password and
you
things
have to
like
consider
that.
that script in there. And so a lot went into this back and forth. It was a pretty difficult situation to cover. So thinking about where your device is going to be in its entirety is an important part of the total product lifecycle as well.
And if we say the SPDF is a subset of the TPLC, which I agree with, you mentioned the hard coded password that was someone just grabbed off the internet. Like, and this happens a lot. People find on Stack Overflow or whatever forum that people are writing about code. People just software developers grab stuff straight off the internet and put it in the code. What are some of the best ways to set up that secure product development framework so those things can be catched sooner than later?
So, what we want to look at is first off, what practices are your engineers following? You should have very, very strict standard operating procedures. This is how you're writing the code. This is the, standard that we're adhering to. If you're using, let's say you're writing a Java application, there are secure coding standards like the CERT Java standard. If So you want to make sure that engineers are following a principle such as that to the letter. There should be checks in place. No code can be changed without multiple layers of verification from other people. You always want a couple sets of eyes on something. And so, like, even if, when we're writing documents, we always want someone to double check. Oftentimes, I'm going to be the one who's signing off on someone else's pen test report. And so even though I'm the reviewer for that report, if I'm writing my own pen test report, I'm going to have someone else go and review it because we always want multiple sets of eyes on something. So adhering to secure coding standards, multiple steps of verification and checks, and then a CI/CD setup. So that is continuous integration and continuous development. As you're making changes to the code, it's going to continuously push out these changes to one place or another. And as you're going in, one of those places can be static testing, where it's scanning through the source code, looking for hard-coded credentials, looking for insecure coding practices, and then it's flagging them and saying you need to fix these. You also want to check the supply chain security. So going into that software bill of materials, how are you not introducing any insecure components into the device? How are you checking for these insecure components? So that can be an automated process as you're going through the code flow. You need the tooling and the infrastructure in place. But then as soon as you're making changes, everything is automatically checked and verified. So you don't really have to worry about missing something like that. Even if someone is making a mistake, they aren't following these secure coding standards, you'll have automated tooling to make these checks, and you should have multiple sets of eyes that are making these checks as well. So in a good environment, mistakes will be caught and remediated very quickly. We're not saying that no one's going to make mistakes. That's just not feasible, but you should be able to find them.
How likely is it that people can actually set up these secure product development frameworks or a secure CI/CD pipeline? How feasible is that actually? Because it seems like most development organizations that these could be even be a CRO or internal development do not have any of this.
No, and it's true. It is not easy. When you're writing code, if you're just going in, writing code, pushing it out to GitHub, it's not going to be a secure process by default. What I can say for sure is 100% of engineers will make mistakes. Everyone's going to make mistakes when they're writing code. It's impossible to write perfectly secure code as soon as you're moving past one or two lines of code, really. And so setting up that CI/CD pipeline, that secure product development framework, it's not easy. It's going to take time, it's going to take effort, and it's going to take man hours. You're usually going to see people do this just explicitly as a job. They're architecture engineers or they're, CI/CD engineers. All they do is develop that development framework, which is kind of interesting. They're developing the developers, but making sure that the process is built out because the developers aren't going to want to have to set that up themselves. They're going to want to write the code. This is a special set of skills that you need a specialized individual to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I would say if I had to put a number on it, 10% of our clients actually have something that is pretty close to a secure product development framework before they come to us. And we can help
I'd
them.
say 5.
You think it's 5?
Oh, yeah. I can not
Well, you deal with our clients more than I do. But yeah.
even down to static testing as a part of continuous integration. It's a standard best practice with development. But the issue is we're interacting with a lot of startups who may not have the expertise or the background in this to understand how to develop all of these cybersecurity concepts in the pipeline. And so when we're looking at something like static testing, which is essentially going to be secure coding 101, they may just be too new in the space. They may not have the resources. They may not have the manpower to do this. And so it's pretty uncommon that we'll see any sort of secure product development framework, and it's extremely uncommon that we'll see a very strong one. Now, having said that, usually when we're working with bigger companies, strategics in the space, they have the maturity and they have the resources to have engineers focused purely on the development architecture. And so someone is maintaining all of this infrastructure, they have it stood up. Every single piece of code goes through all these different layers of checks, and they have full-time employees just making sure that infrastructure is in place. And so It's not really that manufacturers are being lazy or they're forgetting about it. It's just that it's very hard to do and very time consuming. And there are a million things happening with a startup. So sometimes it can get pushed to the back burner.
It's interesting because I know a lot of startups. We work with a lot of startups, and a lot of them have contracted out their software development to a software development organization. And then when we peel back the covers a little bit, that software development organization, which is all they don't do secure software development, which I always find interesting. Unless it's like a highly regulated industry like nuclear, it's still like in its infancy with medtech and in I think software development in general.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And it's really interesting because I think that creating software documentation, that's been something that's been happening since the 90s. And so contract manufacturers, contract engineers are pretty used to creating good software artifacts at this point. That's why when we're looking at, if you look at a contract manufacturer for medtech, they'll often say, we are ISO 13485 compliant, which is quality systems in medical devices. What that means is they're preparing all the documentation and artifacts to feed into your quality system, saying, here's our architecture, here are our requirement specs, here is our V&V and traceability back to the requirement specs. Now, what we want to look for is, are you IEC 62304 compliant? And 62304 is medical device secure medical software development. And so that is when you're moving into that CI/CD pipeline. They have all of these checks in place. They have all the static testing, the analysis of your software bill of materials. They're building in all of the security requirements and they're testing them, which is required to show the FDA security requirement testing. And so, but interestingly enough, if you look around for contract manufacturers in the medtech space, you're not going to see 62304 compliance as much as you think you would. But you'll always see secure software, not secure, but good software documentation. Good cybersecurity documentation is a little bit newer.
Yeah, I wonder if this challenge is ever going to, or this gap is ever going to close. Because I've been involved with cybersecurity for like 30 years, and it's always been a challenge getting software developers to develop code securely. Even though there's plenty of documentation today, like OWASP has a whole DevSecOps playbook. It's not like there's a lack of what to do. I think, like you said, it's costly. Like a lot of these SaaS tools are extremely costly, and it requires someone that's looking at a bigger picture than maybe the person developing the code, because they're looking at this overall framework and how it should all tie together. Um, yeah, so I think it's just the complexity of implementing, maybe the cost, are a couple of the reasons it's not being done as much as it should be. Should be.
Definitely. Yeah, and we always say this, but cybersecurity is no one's first choice to do. Nobody wants to do cybersecurity. It's expensive and it does not add any tangible, immediate value to your product. Now, if your product gets hacked, you're immediately going to see the value of cybersecurity, but nobody wants it until it's too late. And so when someone's trying to roadmap the 10,000 things they have to do when they're trying to start up and create this product, MedTech Innovators, a secure software development lifecycle, it's expensive, it's very time consuming, and it doesn't add tangible value. They're going to look at things like marketing, sales teams, having an actual product as the immediate priorities. And so very often this can just slide to the back. But it's a little bit of a difficult situation because if you don't have it in place, you aren't going to meet regulatory scrutiny. You're going to have problems getting acquired by hospitals or resellers. And so yes, it doesn't provide immediate visible value. The second you need to meet regulatory compliance, you will see the value.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because I think the number, like I've heard from investors, is like 93% of medtech startups fail. And imagine like you're trying to spend all this money on setting up a secure product development framework, a TPLC, and decommissioning, but your product actually never gets launched. That's kind of the irony is you need all these things set up to get approved by the FDA or EUMDR. But then if you haven't actually figured out how to commercialize your product, these things that may have all been for nothing. I guess just like the development of the product or launching the company, it's the same concept. But yeah, it's interesting. Like if your product never gets out there, the decommissioning aspect is irrelevant.
Right. But you're not going to get your product out there if you haven't considered the decommissioning aspect.
Right. Yeah. So I can understand like why these medtech startups are like, we don't even know if our product's gonna make it, but we're having to spend money and to figure out how to decommission it if it makes it. But we're just trying
Yeah.
to get it to market. You know, it's a tough decision, but you have to like do it for the regulatory requirements. But from a funding and a getting something to market, I can understand the mindset around that, around like cybersecurity in general, like why people don't want to do it and why there might be some resistance about even these things like the SPDF or the total product lifecycle.
Totally. Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we're coming up on time here. Any last words of wisdom, Trevor?
Yeah, I think that cybersecurity should start at the concept and then it should finish at your exit. So it's not something you do once, it's something you're always considering, and that's the total product lifecycle. You have to figure out how you're handling cybersecurity all the way up until, the very end. Even something that we're preparing documentation for as part of our post-market plan is what happens if the company goes under to any fielded devices. And so it's a hard conversation, but it's something you have to think about. And so cybersecurity needs to be addressed throughout everything. That's why they call it the total product lifecycle instead of partial product lifecycle.
That's a good point. Even if your company, you could have fielded like one product, and your company goes out of business, what happens to those products, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's
that's
something
one
that
of
we
those
have
use
to talk
cases we
about.
have to walk through.
Yep. Every single time we have to go through that conversation. And clients never want to have it. They're like, we don't want to think about what happens if we go out of business. And I say, well, you have to. You have to think about all this.
It's interesting because people don't want to think about their own death either, right?
Mhm.
Because I know I was talking to some people like not too long ago, and this woman's father died, did not have a will, did not have a trust, nothing was figured out, so it was a mess. The family didn't know what to do with anything, and it caused more stress, right? And then about a year has gone by with this person, and I've asked her if she's got a will, and she doesn't. So I'm like, you just went through this with your parent. It was very stressful, but now you're going to put your kids through it. So like, it's like I'm saying this is like the total product life cycle, decommissioning ourselves, I guess. But it's like
Right.
we
Yeah.
often don't think about it. It's like, but it makes it more challenging for everybody else. There's resistance, though.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Nobody wants to have that conversation. Nobody wants to talk about their company failing. Nobody wants to talk about themselves failing.
but statistically, we're all going to fail at some point, so we might as well figure it out. At least for
Yeah.
me, I'm doing revocable living trust and a few other things. I'm getting those things done because I don't want to leave all this confusion to people if I die. Uh, and I've witnessed other people that have had that happen to them. So I'm just taking care of business. I guess I'm thinking of the TPLC in terms of me.
Yeah. With all the dangerous sports and extreme whatever that I do, I should probably figure that out sooner or
Yeah,
later.
you should probably figure it out too. Yeah,
What happens if I go down free diving but don't come up? Who gets the car? All that good stuff.
exactly. Otherwise, it's up for decisions, and people like don't actually know what your intentions were at some point.
Yeah,
Get to
exactly.
guess. Cool. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up here. Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Med Device Cyber Podcast. I hope you found value in this podcast about the TPLC and a little bit of a deep dive into the SPDF as well. And hope to see you on the next one.